Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Priscilla. Welcome to our third dialogue as part of the program Practice as Research on Personal Being and the Wider World. If you are here for the first time, welcome. But if you have been here before and you went to our last two dialogues, welcome again. And I hope you enjoy the last two sharings that we had. And like last time, if you want to let us know who you are so we know who we are talking a little bit to, and you can use the chat box to let us know who you are, where you're from, and if you are also an arts practitioner, we can learn a little bit more about you. Otherwise, you can also get in touch with us via our social media. You can reach us on our Facebook, IG, or YouTube. Our topic today is creativity, arts, and community. It sounds like we want to include everything, and you will know why when I tell you more about our speaker today. If you have any question for him during this dialogue, you can use the chat box as well to do so. And if time allows, then I'll get your question to our speaker. Are we good? Yeah. Now, let me tell you more about our speaker today. Mr. Greg Klerkx, I have a feeling that our speaker is plausibly one of the origins for the term slasher, if he didn't actually invent it. He talks about the space and the stars, and his voice is found in the education, the arts, the government, and the business sector, not only in UK, but also in US, Europe, and now in Hong Kong as well. He is the author of the book, The Emissary, and Lost in Space, The Fall of NASA and the Dream of a New Space Age. So yes, he speaks English to us, but he actually also speaks Mars and astronauts and Musk, I think. So he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure he does. He co-founded an arts producing company, Nimble, which their production not only discussed about important social issues, but also won multiple awards in the Edinburgh Festival and has since toured globally. He will tell us more about his work in a bit, and actually he has involved in many more art productions, and he will also tell us about them too. Greg has a particular line of work to connect artists and education in the area of creativity. And he does that in different communities around the world. And that sounds like the mega version of my job and what my organization, Arts Platform, is envisioning. And therefore, he is here to share with us today. He is the most kind, resourceful, and generous gentleman you can meet. And exactly how he can be so magical, we are going to find out together. So please welcome my friend, Mr. Greg Klerkx. Yay.
Thank you, Priscilla. That's that's one of the nicest introductions I think I've ever had anywhere. So thank you so much, and welcome everyone, and thank you for coming and spending time tonight. I think what's supposed to happen now is I'm supposed to tell you a bit about myself and a bit about my background, and what I have to say and why I'm here talking to you about artistic practice and its connection with community or communities. So I'll do that as quickly but as clearly as I can, and then we can get into the dialogue. So as you might tell from my accent, I'm based in London, but I'm not originally from the UK. I'm originally from the US, but I have lived in London and worked in the United Kingdom for the past 20 years or so. I know I don't look that old, but you don't have to say yes or no to that. And I came to the UK with a writing background for the most part, with a background writing journalism, essays, two books, as Priscilla has outlined, but very quickly got into a world that connected not only my writing practice, but also other artistic practice directly with community projects. And when I say community projects, I mean projects in schools, projects with nonprofit organizations, occasionally projects with business. And it was a fascinating world for me because I had always associated up to that point working in the arts and working in the community as largely being separate things. Or when those things came together, they had a conversation with each other, but they never really worked together. So one could speak to the other, but they weren't influencing each other in any meaningful way. That changed when I started working in the UK, and particularly through a program called Creative Partnerships, which was a government-funded program in the UK that put artists of many, many kinds together in education contexts with teachers and students, and did this with strong funding and a lot of dedication over the course of about a decade. And I got very involved in creative partnerships. It helped spur the creation of my company, Nimble Fish, which Priscilla has described. And it also spurred a different way of thinking for me about how I practice as an artist, whether that's as a writer or a producer or in other areas, and how I draw inspiration from and give inspiration to the communities I work with. And both of those flows, those different directions, are really important. I'm going to show you just a couple of examples of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about communities and arts and the flow between one influencing the other. So artistic practice influencing a community, and doing work in the community as an artist influencing my practice. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you a couple of things. So one of the first projects that I worked on was a project called The Container. And The Container was a stage play. It was written by a very fine playwright named Claire Bailey. And Claire had always wanted to stage this play not in a theater, but in somewhere else. And the play is about refugees from various parts of the world trying to travel to the United Kingdom in the back of a container lorry, like the one you see here in this picture. And Claire had never been able to make this happen. I was working on a creative partnerships project that was using a container lorry very much like this as a way of introducing young people to what's called site-specific performance. So many of you will know exactly what that is, but for those of you who don't, it's about doing performance not in a standard theater or in a gallery space, but in any kind of space that you choose, and making that space integral to the actual work that you're trying to create. So we were doing this as an educational project. We ended up connecting with Claire, and we ended up creating her play in this exact container lorry. And we took this container lorry to the Edinburgh Festival. So these are two shots. The shot on the left is a still from the actual production, where we had 6 actors, 2 production team members, and an audience of up to 25 people shut inside this container that you see to the right. And that is actually one of the students we worked with originally, who we hired as a set decorator. So it was their first professional job to create this production. This production sold out. It's run in Edinburgh. It won 2 major awards, and it continues to tour the world to this day in this format. And it sparked a kind of a revolution in doing performances and immersive experiences inside of containers and boxes like this. All of this came from an education project. All of this came from a project that I was doing in the community that didn't have anything at the time to directly do with either Claire's play or my work as a writer and producer. But that ended up happening because of that. A second example is something where artists in particular ended up learning something about working in very public site-specific places. So this was a project in Essex, which is outside of London in the UK. And it was something we called it a learning festival, but we took over a shopping mall for a day. We remade shop spaces, we took down walls, we rewired things, we redressed things, and we brought in young people and artists to basically engage the public in a series of artistic experiences. So you can see different things happening on the left. It's a sound experience that this young boy was leading. He helped create it with artists, but then he was leading it as an artist himself. A lot of the artists who were involved in this production, who were working in an educational context, had never worked outside a gallery or a museum or a stage production. They didn't understand how to work in public spaces. Quite a few of them, after this production, ended up doing that kind of work themselves. So they ended up taking their practice, their creative practice, and finding public spaces and found audiences to engage with their practice. And that came directly from working in the community in this particular way. These are a couple more shots from that Learning Town project. A slightly different project for me as a writer. There was a project in the UK that ran over several years to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the start and the end of World War I. And it was called, what was it called? The Centennial Commissions. And the government and several other private funders commissioned very high profile artists in the UK to create works like the one you see here. So this is a cathedral in the north of England. And what you're seeing here are ceramic poppies. So poppy is the small red plant that's very symbolic in Europe of World War I. These are made of ceramic pouring down from an upper window of the cathedral into the garden. So that was a very high profile piece of art. I ended up working with the artists and some other people to create a learning resource that helped young people understand this artwork, to understand its origins, to understand how the artist conceived it, to understand why the work was important and what it was meant to do. And that felt really important to me as an artist because if you're not developing or helping to develop in some way your future audiences, you're limiting the potential for the work that you can create. So that was a really important project for me. And the last project I want to share with you as a demonstration was a very large project that happened in the UK, in London particularly, a couple of years ago. There's an artist and director named Steve McQueen. You probably have heard his name. He's won the Turner Prize. He's also an Oscar-winning film director. He won the Oscar for a movie called 12 Years a Slave. And he wanted to create an artwork that was about one of the most ordinary things you can think of. Children going through year 3 in London. Year 3 means that they're about 7 or 8 years old. And what he did is he conceived of a very simple artwork where he was going to take class photos of about 2,000 year 3 classes across London and exhibit this as an artwork. That's the total artwork, just the photos of these classes. And you can see a little bit of it here. This is what the artwork looked like in the Tate Britain Museum. And what he was doing was he was saying that the future audiences, the future people of the country are what we ought to be paying attention to. And he created an artistic framework, an artistic method to get people to see this future generation differently. This was one of the most successful exhibitions that Tate Britain has done in recent years, even with the COVID delay. It started in 2019, was COVID delayed for a year and a half, and then the Tate extended it. And not only were traditional patrons of the Tate Museum coming to see this, but of course, every child and every parent and every relative of every child in this Steve McQueen artwork came to see it. And they understood for themselves art differently. They understood that art could be for them, that artistic spaces could be for them. And for many of them and many of their teachers, this was the beginning of a new kind of journey through the arts and arts practice. So that's the kind of work I do. And that's the way I think about work. And I've talked an awful lot here, and I'm going to stop and let Priscilla ask me some questions, and hopefully you will have some as well.
Well, question-wise, I have around 3,000 here, and I'm thinking like where to start. And let me condense a little bit. So first thing first, I think I'm like speaking for and to the artist first. So one of the stigma for practicing artists is that, oh, if I'm successful at making my own art, why would I want to go to teach? Or what is it for me there, right? Or if I am already so successful, why do I have to communicate that to the community? Why wouldn't they just know it directly, right? So can you help us to understand or dissect that a little bit about the translation for an artist between or among different audience or perception of work, or how do you see that, or how should we do that?
Sure. So to the first point about if you are an artist and you feel that you are successful in your practice, why should you engage with community work? Well, maybe you shouldn't. I'm just going to be really provocative. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe your practice is better done in a kind of creative isolation space where you are with your own ideas and your own practice, and you express yourself in that context. However, my experience and the experience of many other artists I work with, and I work with dance artists, with multimedia artists, theater artists, you name it, is that when they have engaged with the community, either through high profile projects like the Tate Year 3 project or other things like that, what they discover is they discover new sources of inspiration. Mm. They discover new perspectives on ideas that they already have. I think many of us would have the experience, certainly I have the experience as a writer, that I get very into my own bubble. I have my idea, I'm pursuing my idea, I'm excited about my idea. But then when I get a little perspective on it from one place or another, suddenly another angle opens up. Suddenly there are other possibilities. It doesn't mean that I automatically change what I'm doing, but it makes me think, feel, and act differently about my art. And I would suggest that those artists who open themselves to that kind of connection will find themselves in a wider creative space. The second part of your question, which is why doesn't the rest of the world just get it when it comes to art? It's a great question. And all art forms, whether it's theater, whether it's dance, whether it's music, have their own particular language, and not merely the technical language of whatever art form you're talking about, but also the language of creation and the language of expression. Sometimes these things are self-evident. You do a dance performance and people automatically understand it. But certain kinds of art forms and certain kinds of art at certain times can be intimidating for audiences, and not in a good way. So I remember having doing some work years ago with the Royal Opera House in London, which is a very old, very venerable, high art opera and ballet. And they were realizing that their audience was all of a particular type. They were older, they were wealthy, they weren't getting any younger, they weren't bringing any new people in. And they realized they needed to find new ways to communicate with new audiences in order to build their future. And if any artist doesn't eventually have an audience, it's very hard to sustain the work, or at least to feel that you're making connections through the work the way that you'd like to.
Go back to the first thing that you said. So it is not because that we have to do our art or bring our arts to the community or in the education sector, but we want to. And there are so many reasons for us to do that. So I'm sure like what you mean is that it's not for everyone, obviously, not for all the artists, but for those that who want to, who sees that opportunity to explore more or to experiment with our work or to translate that language into everyday language that people could get connected with. It is a good platform, right? And then we have to practice how to do it well so that it's actually meaningful, right? The experience. Do I get it right?
You do get it right. And I think the other thing I would add to that is that even for those artists who want to make community practice, who want to make community connections, it may not be that all of the work you are doing is the right thing to connect with community at all times. But the flip side of that, the opposite side of that, is that community work can be tremendously inspiring. Steve McQueen, who has all the money and support that he needs to make any project he wants to make. I mean, he's that kind of artist. He works at that level. He remembered the work he'd done in education, and that was an inspiration for him. And that inspiration created this work called Tate Year 3, which won all kinds of awards here in the UK for all kinds of reasons. So it wasn't so much that he brought work into the community, all of his work. He drew inspiration from the community work. And that's the main message here, I think, is important for me.
Inspiring, yes. So you also mentioned about audience, right? So I'm bringing in another stigma. So when we bring our artwork to the community or in schools in particular, we have to make it simple enough for our audience to understand. That is a stigma. I'm not saying that I agree with that. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? If I
Well,
say
I
it,
think, and
sorry,
sorry, Ms.
if I am being very blunt, I mean, like, shall we dumb down our work so that it's easier for the general audience?
I would never encourage any artist to dumb down their work for any audience, because at that point you're doing that, you are not doing the art that you set out to make. So I think that that's the first message I would deliver. However, I think there's a difference between dumbing down your work and unpacking it, and having audiences understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, and why you're doing it. And this is often where the disconnect can happen for artists who work in community settings. You're not changing the work. What you're doing is you're changing how you talk to people about the work. And it's a really important distinction. Steve McQueen, when he created the Tate Year 3 project, he was interviewed all over the place. At no point was he condescending about the work. At no point did he back away from why he thought it was important or what he was trying to do. But he spent a lot of time, and I spend a lot of time when I do this work, saying, here's why I'm doing this. Here's what I'm doing. Here are the things that I'm hoping will be communicated by this work. And that's very different from changing the work itself.
I feel like sometimes we complain that the audience, when they grow up, right, when they're adults, or our general audience don't understand our artwork, is because we didn't give them the proper materials to learn from when they were younger, or in a more general setting, right? So that's why, like, opera, it's extincting language. Well, but how much of the opera understanding or knowledge are we giving them when they're learning about music? So that's something that I also want to advocate about, right? So to give them, don't look down on our audience or on our kids or our students, because they know more than we imagine they do. And if we give them the proper nutrients, give them the proper seeds and materials to learn from, they actually surprise us a lot, right? Very often.
I think that's right. And I think I can tell you a story from when I was younger. So I went to high school in the middle part of America, in a place called Michigan. It was a very nice place to grow up, but it wasn't very interesting culturally. We didn't have a lot of exposure to the arts, and particularly arts that were at a certain high level. For some reason, I don't know why to this day, we had the professional modern dance company from Atlanta, Georgia, come and do some performances at our school. I'm sure they were on some kind of tour of some kind. And that absolutely transformed how I thought about art and the arts. And it wasn't because they explained to me what they were doing, it was because I could see it happening. I could see their process. I could hear the conversations that they were having. I could see what resulted. And I felt for the first time that this was a world I might want to be in and that I could be in. And I think, again, coming back to the Tate 3 project, when those young children, many of them are from very deprived backgrounds, when they walked into that Tate Britain Museum, one of the most venerable museums in the United Kingdom, and they saw themselves on a wall and realized they were part of something, for the first time they thought, I have permission. I can be here. This isn't not for me. This is for me. And that's the most important thing about proper artists and proper art connecting with communities.
It's beautiful. Well, to bring the sense of like that translation in a wider world. So we're talking about like bringing arts to different performance venues, right? Or we sort of exhibit our arts in a different angle. Like, might as well be like a education program or community service or a stage, right? What do you think? Well, I didn't ask you this question before, so if you don't want to answer me, I don't know what you can do now, but let me know. So
I'm stuck.
or just pretend that the network doesn't work. You came from the Mars, like you came from the space, right? So how do you think about like cross-disciplinary from beyond the arts field?
Yes. No, it's a good question. One of the projects that I worked on for many years was a kind of version of this creative partnerships project I described earlier that was implemented in Lithuania. Small country, Baltic country, was very keen to try to bring more creativity, more exposure to the arts to their school system, to both teachers and young people, but also their families and their students. Now, the way creative partnerships worked in the UK, it was all about artists. So artists were considered to be where the creative stuff was. In Lithuania, they took a very different view. They said creativity is in the arts, definitely, but it's also in engineering. It's also in architecture. It's in geology and chemistry. And so lots of people from those fields came in and mixed with the artists. And we had a lot of these sessions about understanding our creative form, which is what we ended up describing it as, because a geologist is not working in an art form, but they are working in a creative form. How do you understand something? How do you ask questions? How do you experiment? How do you take risks? So there's things that artists do. Those are things that geologists do. And that mixing of different practices was so powerful. I think it was powerful not just for the schools because they got to see geology in a different way, but it was powerful for the artists. There was one, see if I can get this right. There was one dance artist who did some incredible work with objects based on some mineralogy that they learned through this program. So they were working with natural objects in this kind of performance piece that they did. And that kind of cross connection would never have happened without this project, without these two disciplines, well, lots of different disciplines coming together in a community context. That's what brought them together. They would not have connected in any other way.
So now it brings me to another question. Well, maybe we'll come back to this a little bit because I am absolutely fascinated by ideas like that. But before we keep on dreaming, because those that sounds to me is like a dream, right? A dream that came true for you, not for me yet. So how do I make it happen? I want to know about so I have an idea, right? I don't know, you know what I mean, what it's in my head. I just cannot say it to the audience now. So all those big dreams and wish to have different things that come together because you want to manifest that big vision that you have. How do you advise for us to make it happen? Like, what is the next step that you can do when you have that vision?
I think the question for me always is whatever I'm doing, whether it's writing, whether it's producing, whether it's working with artists or creative folks, or whether it's working with educators, is what is this for? Why? What is this for? So if you are an artist, what is your art for? It's for you, obviously, because you have an urge to express something and say something, but why? In what context? What kind of connections do you want to make? What kind of effect do you want to have? Maybe you don't care if you have an effect. Maybe you simply want to express something in the way that you express it. That's okay. But if it moves beyond that, if it moves to the point of, I want to influence, or I want to create dialogue, or I want to generate a response, feelings, or I want people to think in a different way, well, then you have to ask yourselves bigger questions about how that happens. And quite often, in my world at least, in the UK and across Europe and other places, it happens by collaborating. It happens by exchanging ideas and saying, this is something that's important to me, and I want to express it, and I want to connect this way. And working with others to see if you can find new ideas, new perspectives, and new connections. Virtually all the work I do is collaborative somehow. There's very, very little that I do with just me doing my thing on my own without connecting with anybody. And it's just, it's the only way I know how to work these days. Wasn't always the only way I know how to work, but these days it is. And it's great for that. So I think I'm not sure if it's answering your question or not, but I think if you want to make an impact, if you want to have an effect, if you want to communicate as an artist, you have to open your practice. You have to open the box of your thinking and feeling and creating to others, whether that's other artists or whether that's people who don't understand the arts or whether it's both. I believe that really strongly.
Tell us more about collaboration, because I already know that some of the viewers here now, they would want to know too. Like, what is your experience in working with other people? Successful examples or not so successful, painful examples? How do you find that, if you can tell us?
Painfully. Yes, I can. There was a project a very long time ago that I did. I was telling you a little bit earlier about it, and it began as an education project, and I was in the role of a producer, so I had to kind of come up with the idea and kind of somehow make it work. And it was based on a book called Einstein's Dreams, which is an absolutely beautiful book. If you haven't read it, it's a poetical look at all of the dreams Einstein might have had in the days leading up to him coming up with his theory of special relativity, which is the E equals mc squared equation. Absolutely gorgeous book. The writer is Alan Lightman, and he is a physicist and a poet, so he knows what he's doing. So I said, this is a great book. We can do something interesting with this. And we can do something very big with this. So we wanted to take over an entire school and create a promenade, site-specific immersive performance. So site-specific, taking into the school, immersive, meaning people are doing things, not just observing things, and promenade, meaning that they're moving through the spaces of the school. I didn't know how to do any of this. I knew it needed to happen. I knew I wanted to happen. So I ended up starting to bring in people who knew how to do this. And the main thing when I was talking to these professional set designers, professional sound artists, professional dance artists, I am not an expert in any of these things. So I had to be first and foremost very honest about what I wanted, but also very vulnerable. I had to risk looking like I didn't know what I was doing. And that was absolutely essential, saying, I know I want this to happen, but I don't know the first thing about doing this kind of thing. So you tell me how to do it. You tell me the things I don't know. And I think that kind of vulnerability is really important to collaboration. I think it can be very tempting to want to present yourself as an artist as being in total control of your practice and your ideas. And I understand that impulse, but I think when you are collaborating, that vulnerable space is the only way that actually produces something fruitful.
Amy is asking you a question. I think I should let her ask you first, and then I will continue. Although the collaborating thing opened a big, well, I already have 3,000 questions, right? This opened a big door, so I don't know if we can stay here for 4 hours. But Amy has a question. Amy is a very good friend of mine. She is a physician, but also a lighting designer. So can you see that, Greg, actually?
I'm reading the questions right now. Yes. So can I ask what he thinks about his experience producing Year 3, specifically when the works were also exhibited inside the tube, yes, or on outdoor billboards, etc. So the first thing to say is I was not the producer of the entire Year 3 project. I had a very specific role, two very specific roles. My job was to help prepare teachers to understand the work and help their students understand the work, and then to also help the young people understand the work when they were going to be going into the Tate. So I'm better at answering the second two questions, which is how did teachers, parents, and students perceive when they were exhibited in the public space, and how would you compare this with being exhibited inside the Tate? The sociological aspect of this project, yes. I think there was a lot of preparation. Well, I was going to say there's a lot of preparation work with the teachers, students, and their families around this. There wasn't actually that much preparation in the sense that there were permissions. Obviously, the students had to have permission to be able to participate in this. That was not that difficult. There were a series of activities to work with the students so that they understood photography. So there's an education process around photography. There was an understanding that they would be part of an art exhibition. I think most of the children and quite a few of the families didn't understand what that meant. So, and then there was the advertising aspect of it. As you say, this was a partnership between the Tate, between an organization called A New Direction, who I work with a lot in London, and an organization called Art Angel. And Art Angel did most of the tube ads, the billboards, that sort of thing. The tube ads and the billboards, as far as the children and the parents were concerned, didn't have that much effect. What had the biggest effect was going into this massive, venerable Victorian building, the Tate Britain, where most of them, we did the surveys, had never been, and suddenly seeing themselves as part of what was clearly the biggest exhibition in the space. And the response was pride. Children were incredibly proud. Their parents were incredibly proud. But I think the biggest response that came through was this sense of, hey, this is a place that I can be part of. You know, they'd never been in a place like this before, a museum like this before. They'd never experienced art by a very high level, high functioning artist before. And suddenly they were in the middle of it. And that, digging beneath what Steve McQueen was doing, all of the other motivations he had, was really what he wanted to do. He wanted to take an entire generation of London children and say, you are part of the future. You belong in this space. You should be in the room. And it was a huge statement. And time will tell, because it's only been a couple of years ago. But I suspect, based on some of the feedbacks, I've continued to work with some of those teachers and schools and a couple of the artists, photographers who were involved, that will have the kind of effect that he was hoping for.
Amy said she thought more response happened, but what does it mean by more response? Amy, if you want to turn on, you can. Do you want to? Do you want to ask?
I thought the billboards were nearby their class or in the neighborhood. Not necessarily. No, they were lots of places throughout London. So the neighborhood I live in, London, was not where a lot of the schools were, and we had billboards in this area.
Yeah, it's all right. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'm trying. These are good questions, and you clearly know about the project. So I'm trying to answer as many questions, much of this as I can. There was certainly the heart. If you're asking about the permission process was the most challenging part of the permission process, if this is your question, was certainly around the public display, was certainly around the tube ads and the billboards. But that was just a process, and that process was managed by A New Direction more than any of the other players involved, because they had charge of the school's aspect of thing. But yeah, that was simply a process, and I think this suggests for me something broader, which is if you are working in the community, if you're doing arts in the community, it can seem challenging because of all the logistics. And I did a project years ago where we took over half of a historic town in Kent, which is also outside of London. And the logistics were very challenging because you're dealing with audiences who don't know they're going to be audiences. You're dealing with spaces that aren't directly connected to performance. So there is a lot of that. But those are all, as far as I'm concerned, those are details. I'm actually wondering what it means when class photos are exhibited in public space. And when you say public space, are you meaning the tube and billboards versus the museum?
Do you mean like if people are like thinking about consent from the kids, or if they arouse negative comments to the kids, that kind of thing? Sometimes when I listen, well, Amy, you can continue to type, but yes, outside.
When they're exhibited outside, that was Art Angel that handled most of that. They're very experienced in this kind of work. Again, there's a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that the children and their families were okay with this. In many cases, I don't think there was a case. I'm trying to rack my brains. I don't think there was a case where unless there were children, what they call children in care. So that was children who are in a specific protected situation, who aren't with families, or children who may be in vulnerable circumstances. Perhaps they were fleeing violence in other countries and were relocated. I think those would have been the exceptions in terms of children who could be displayed in outdoor, in the billboards and on the tube. But for the most part, it was logistic, it was a time process. It wasn't a challenging process to get permission. If you're asking me conceptually in a more exposed environment, yes. And again, I don't think this was an issue in the end, in the sense that I don't think there were permissions denied. So you're asking about this conceptually. I saw the most amazing show last year at the Edinburgh Fringe, which did performance work with young people that I have never seen before, really young people. And they were doing a very adult production. It was nothing inappropriate, but they were performing well beyond their years. And it was absolutely amazing. And I talked to some of the artists afterwards about the process. And I do think, as with Tate Year 3, it is about the young people and their families understanding what you're doing, why you're doing it, and if you're okay with that. So having your class photo displayed on a billboard in a public space where you don't know what the responses are going to be, yes, there is potentially some risk in that, but if you are managing the risk along the way as best you can, this is where the art comes in. Art doesn't always have a certain outcome. Art isn't always, you can't entirely control the responses. The best of my knowledge, though, in the case of Tate Year 3, there were not negative responses at any significant level. I mean, I'm pretty sure of that. I mean, if you have information to the contrary, that would override that. But I stayed connected to the project for quite a while after it was done, and didn't come up with anything like that.
I think, well, Amy is trying to ask why, like, why would you want to do that? But I also think that we have like a cultural differences here when like certain thing is displayed, or when art is in the community, or how do we treat people's work, we probably have like a little bit of gap in understanding. So Greg, well, he has a little bit of experience in Hong Kong too, so maybe he understands what I mean. So you can try to also.
So just quickly, I think that's important. So when the Tate Year 3-year billboards went up, they went up without any information. They were simply the photos. You might remember this, Amy, if you saw it. It sounds like you did. And I think the intention behind that, the intention of Steve McQueen, the intention of Art Angel, was to get people to say, why am I seeing a billboard of children in a class? And it was the same intention that Steve McQueen had initially, which is, these are important people. It's important for you to see them. It's important for you to see their expressions, their faces, to understand how they are in a context. It's important for society to remember that they're here and that they're coming up. So I think that was the conceptual purpose behind it. It wasn't advertising it. They didn't need to advertise it. The thing sold out right, left, and center. But it was taking that idea that went into the museum and putting it outside the museum for the same reason.
Sometimes it sounds a little bit dreamy. It's like whatever you wish, it will come true, or it can happen. And it is exactly the same for all other contexts. So I guess some of the question came from there as well. Like how do we make things happen, as in sometimes the process or the execution is not as easy as just wish for it to do. Well, Amy, thank you. I want to thank Amy for all the great input and questions. And if
thank you,
viewers have questions, you can ask too. It is, well, Amy, however, if you want to continue to talk to Greg, we can have another meeting and you can chat with him. He has like endless resources and he knows everything actually. So he knows everything. So we have not a lot of time left. We have 15 minutes left. Greg, do you have any advice for artists this day?
Well, I suppose if the the purpose of this session is to understand the value of connecting your artistic practice with the community, and then how you do that. I suppose it's always worth thinking. Again, I always come back to the why. So why would you want to do this? And I still think that there is something very powerful in the inspiration that you can get from a community of people, whether you're talking about a school, whether you're talking about a youth center, or any kind of community setting. The work that we did in that shopping mall was quite powerful because we met people who connected with various kinds of arts practice, who had perspectives on that practice that I never would have thought of before. So also, there was another project we did a few years ago that was more relevant to this thread. And it was the idea of gathering stories from a particular community, thousands of stories. We had a particular process of doing this, and then projecting them using projection mapping, which probably some of you will know what that is. So it's high power projectors that tailor their projection to usually a public space. It might be a building. So we took all of these stories and we created a projection map and projected them onto this massive Victorian town hall in the middle of this town. And this is a very rough part of the town. And the audiences we got and the feedback we got, it was very uneven. Some people said, "What's this for? Why am I seeing this?" Other people were transfixed. Other people wanted to make more stories themselves. So the audiences and the connections made to that art were totally different than if we'd contained it in a standard artistic context. If we'd had it in a museum or a gallery, we quite easily could just projected this inside a gallery space. But the point was to take these stories from the people and give them back to the people in a certain way. And I just think there's something really important, particularly in the world we're living in now, which is very complex, which is very diffuse. There are lots of small channels for lots of artistic expression. I'm not knocking those channels, but it's much more easy these days for artistic practice to get siloed and to get lost and to not connect with people. And I think community-led practice, or practice that has a community component, is a counterpoint to that. It's a counterbalance to that siloing that we can often see in the world, where everything becomes perhaps much smaller than it needs to be. So that's my evangelical pitch for doing more of this kind of work.
Yes. Oh, I totally hear you and cannot agree more. Tell me more about creativity. Well, can I start that now? I have 10 minutes. Can you spend 10 minutes to limit all your knowledge into 10 minutes and tell us about the creativity work that you're doing? The brand of it, and what are you promoting, and how people can participate in it, that kind of thing.
Sure. Gosh, there are probably many people better qualified to talk about creativity than I am, but since I do a lot of it, the work I do in creativity mostly is with professionals. It's often with educators. It's often with community and nonprofit leaders. And the biggest aspect of the work is convincing people that they are creative. I believe everyone is creative. I think there's a big problem with confusing creativity and talent. So just because you can't play a musical instrument or can't draw, or well, you can learn to do both of those things, it doesn't mean you're not creative. Creativity for me is about curiosity, constantly practicing curiosity, constantly seeking new solutions and working out how to apply them, although that gets more into innovation. So creativity, thinking about something, innovation, doing something about it. But it's mostly to try to unlock the places that people end up where it becomes easier not to ask hard questions. It becomes easier not to take risks. It becomes easier to spend your time worrying about not failing than trying to find lots of ways to experiment with an idea or with a question. Those are all qualities of creativity, and they live not only in the arts, they live absolutely everywhere. It doesn't matter if you are an accountant or a stay-at-home mom or a research biologist or a politician. It's getting out of the boxes that are very easy to fall into and just doing those other things. And it is also about vulnerability. As I said earlier about the project where I had to ask a lot of what I felt were stupid questions to people who had really a lot of experience, but that's part of it too. You don't learn if you don't ask stupid questions or what feel like stupid questions. So all of those things are what creativity is about for me. And it's something we all have, but I feel like quite often it gets squashed or it gets shut aside. And my work is about bringing it back.
And how do you do that?
How do I do that? Partly I've got, as you know, Priscilla, thousands of games and activities and little things that kind of open up different conversations from different angles. And those are all useful. But the most important thing is to allow people to understand that they are being heard and that they are able to express. And if you can create, so I do work live, I do work virtually. In either of those spaces, it's important to let people know that they are heard, that their voice has value, that there are no stupid questions, and that everything that is discussed grows and becomes more powerful with the group of people that you are working with. That's why I'm a big believer in collaboration. So that's not exactly an answer because it depends on the situation, but that's how I would do it.
So I guess we heard also one of the keywords that Greg gave us today is to collaborate. So we have to work with other people and other sector to realize what we wish to happen. I have another question here for you from an administrator. She doesn't want to type there, so I'm reading it from my chat box. She wants you to address a little bit more on the immersive and site-specific work, as it is getting quite lost, but also a marketing point here.
Okay. Right. Site-specific and immersive work is my favorite kind of work. I've worked inside theaters, quite big theaters, and I've worked inside galleries, but there is nothing for me as challenging or as interesting in creating work in an unexpected space. So that's the site-specific aspect of it. So I've created work, obviously, in the back of a container truck, inside a shopping mall, inside, where else? Lots of places, arches under a motorway, in the middle of a high street, in a churchyard, lots of places. Where was I going with that?
How do we make it not gimmicky?
How do you make it not gimmicky? Because, yeah, you make it not gimmicky by making the site matter. The site has to matter to the work. So the reason the container play worked is because it was a play about people escaping violence and trying to find a better life and doing that in the back of a container lorry. So if you want, so as a way to understand that experience and add value to the play, you give people that immersive experience. You shut them inside that same vehicle with those same actors and that performance, and there's a different kind of feeling you get. The project in the town where we took over half the town, this was a very familiar space for all of the people who went through it. It was the place they bought their morning tea, or they bought something at the shop. Suddenly they were seeing it differently. Suddenly where they bought their tea, they were getting little envelopes with questions, and those questions asked them to go find things in different parts of the town. So by the time this was finished, they did not see their town the same way again. They saw it as a potentially much more interesting, creative, exciting space. But that's why you do that work. There's a lot of gimmicky site-specific work out there, for sure. But the good stuff is separated from the bad stuff by having the site mean something. It has to mean something.
I think it has to do with intention as well. Like, do you use the shopping center as your gimmick, or you really have a statement that you have to make in that specific place? Or if the artists really know what they're saying, I think sometimes it's also a challenge because we live in a world that is so fast and we have social media. Audience have less attention span. So sometimes we attempted to do very quick arts and just happen in a place that you will get a lot of Instagram attention. And sometimes we lost our why and our purpose and our center, I call it, like the center of the art in it. So yeah. So someone also asked you, like, does social media makes a difference? Make a difference, right?
Yes, that's a very broad question. It does make a difference. I think it is always in the control of the artist in terms of what kind of difference it makes. So again, it comes back to, is the word you used is the one I would use, which is intention. What are you trying to express? Why are you trying to express it? What is the effect you want to have? Social media can add to that. It could be simply a marketing tool. It's a great marketing tool. It could be an integral part of it. There was a project quite a few years ago in the early days of Twitter, where there were entire plays told via Twitter when it was still 140 characters. So it was using social media platform in a different way. So you can use it as an artistic tool, but again, intention. Why are you doing it? What are you trying to express? If it is just a gimmick, that's a choice, but it's not a choice that, for me, reflects a deep commitment to an artistic idea necessarily.
You know, for when it comes to the depth of the work, I actually can talk for 2 more hours, and I certainly had a very big discussion with Greg another time about impact and about how, I think I can also use the word integrity, how an artist stay integral to their own work. So that is a big topic. Do you want to say that in a minute? Do you want to condense that?
I mean, if you're an artist, the difference between, for me, an artist and someone who is trying to either just make money or get publicity is, an artist, in the end, the idea is what matters, and the expression of the idea is what matters, and everything else sits around that. So if you are, this is why I say, you in my experience, you never dumb down something for an audience, never, because then you're losing the art. You never dumb it down because you want to promote it through social media, because then you're losing the art. So what's the intention, and why does it matter? And if it doesn't matter, then don't do it.
I agree. Amy, ask you another question. What do you think about the relationship between immersive experience and duration of the artwork? Often the immersive experience can be in short duration. How educators can come to overcome that? How educators can overcome that?
Yeah, I don't have a particular response to that. I've been to immersive experiences that, as you say, are extremely short. I've been to the immersive shows that are for one person and they last for 5 minutes. And then there are immersive shows that are much longer, that last an entire day or a half a day. So again, I think it's the intention. In terms of education, the immersive experience that we did in the school with all the professionals, we kind of completely remade the school. That was an hour and a half, which is very long for a school, but they understood the value of it. They understood the value and the power to connect with people, so they were fine with that.
I'm guessing Amy's question is like, how do you stop the school from doing what they normally do and then do the artwork? I think that is.
Oh, that's trust in the end, really. I mean, it's true in any collaboration, but particularly in education, you have to build trust and shared goals.
1 minute, I have another very good question. So now we have Instagram, right? So why do we still need gallery?
I think Instagram has its uses, but it only has limited uses. It is very short, very bitey. A gallery gives you a lot of space and time to reflect and understand something deeper and more meaningful.
And gallery give you an experience that you cannot have on the computer or on the phone, because you have to walk there, you have to be immersive there, and you can sometimes touch something, smell something, and the duration in a good museum, right? For a good exhibition, the duration that you walk from one work to the other work is also calculated. So you cannot have that on the phone.
Yeah.
59. So we're very good. I know we have more questions coming and everybody want to grab a little bit of Greg. That's my experience too. So stay tuned. Hopefully we have another chance. So thank you for coming to our dialogue today. If you haven't yet followed our social media, so if you have questions to continue to send to Greg, we will direct it to him. And I have to do a little bit of advertisement. We are launching a 3-way collaborative artwork on our website. I'm speaking super fast, so you slow down the video later to understand what I'm saying. So our writer Vivian, a creative media artist Sinhan, and myself as a composer also create a small work on our website. So you can check in a week or two, then you will see our collaborative work. If you want to revise today's content or continue to talk to him, as I said, go to our social media. And if you saw, some people saw our pillow, if you're interested in it, let us know. Before we go, again, I have to thank Greg for spending his time with us and be so generous with his knowledge and to tell us a lot of things and give us a lot of things to think about for the future. And I also have to thank my manager and project manager, Santhi. And we have to shout a big thank to our sponsors for this program. Without them, it also cannot happen. The Hong Kong Arts Development Council and the School of Everyday Life. That's what I cannot mess up. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.